Now, goat versus fish. The versus was at a place in Los Angeles called the Mint, yes? And the ones from the deep fat fried verses, yes, the TJ one and the Paul one and the Scotty one did come to spread their own verses, Goat versus Fish was moving about that verses, and Goat versus Fish noticed there was one that was there. Goat versus Fish noticed one that is calling itself Michael Allen was right there in that verses, attending that verses, celebrating with them. And what was upon one called Michael Allen? What was upon that one fence-sitter that is called Michael Allen? It was Goat versus Fish. It had Goat versus Fish upon it. And when those deep, fat, fried verses, those live verses were happening, yes, they did record those verses. They recorded those verses, yes. You can see those verses on the Patreon of the deep, fat, fried ones, yes. The Pessimist Productions place, they do call it, yes. But when they did have those verses, they did invite other goat and fish to come up upon the verses and to verses with them, yes, for all to see. And that fence-sitter, yes, they did invite fence-sitters as well. Michael Allen did go upon and verses with them, and it had Goat versus Fish upon it. It showed them all Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish would prefer every fence-sitter choose goat or fish. But if you're not going to choose goat or fish, do spread the verses. Do spread the verses like this Albamani one. Yes, it spreads the verses of Goat versus Fish. Like this Michael Allen one. It spreads the verses of Goat versus Fish. And yet there was a questioning, and the Michael Allen one was asked a question about goats. But the Michael Allen one did not know its verses of goat, and did not triumph in that verses. It is a fence-sitter, yes, it is a fence-sitter. Goat versus Fish witnessed those verses, and Goat versus Fish brought Goat versus Fish to those verses. Oh, that one Michael Allen was nowhere to be seen, yes, so ashamed, not knowing its verses of goat. But Goat versus Fish was there. There were many goat there. You know who you are, goat, yes? There was one fish. And it was saying as an evidence of its triumph, it did say, oh, but there are so many fish. And yet that one fish was speaking to two goat. And Goat versus Fish said, yes, well, if there are so many fish, then why are you the only fish that is speaking to these goat? Why do you not seek other fish to prove with an evidence that there are many fish? But that fish could not prove it. It did not ask other ones if they were goat or fish. It was surrounded by goat. But then, the large fish, the Paul's ego fish. Oh, it is a fish. It is a fish, for Goat versus Fish asked that one if it is goat or fish, and it said it was a fish, and all the ones that gathered around to hear that fish speaking, to spread its deep-fried verses, saw that it was a fish. It calls itself a blobfish. It is a fish. The TJ one and the Scotty one, we do not know of the Scotty one. The TJ one claimed to be Goat versus Fish. It said it to Goat versus Fish. It said, I am Goat versus Fish. Fence-sitter, yes. There is a fish, Paul Fish. There is a fence-sitter that is called TJ. And then there is the Scotty one who Goat versus Fish suspects it is a goat, so that it is Goat versus Fish. And then there is a fence-sitter. Yes, but these are the deep, fat, fried verses. Big fish, many goat. You may say the goat triumphed, for there were not many fish, but all the goat did congregate and listen to the verses of that one fish, and no goat would dare to verses the Paul's ego fish. They were so in reverence of this fish. Goat versus Fish says it is a triumph for fish.
Goat versus Fishes. I need you to like, subscribe, share, comment on all Goat versus Fish platforms: YouTube, iTunes, Facebook, Instagram. Please find out what you are. It is very important to know whether you are a goat or you are a fish. It will change your life.